Welcome to the Inner Source Healing Podcast, a show dedicated to helping individuals heal from the impact of toxic abuse. I'm Deborah Ashway, a licensed clinical mental health therapist and a licensed clinical addiction specialist. But more than that, I'm someone who's been down that path. I know the journey of healing can be long and challenging, but I also know that it's possible to break free from the chains of dependency, codependency, and trauma bonding. When we awaken from that trance that toxic relationships can create, we finally can breathe, live, and experience life in full, vivid, extraordinary color. Through this podcast, I aim to provide support, guidance, and resources for anyone seeking to heal from the impacts of toxic abuse. We will explore the healing process and the challenges and the false perceptions that may be holding you back from living a more fulfilling and meaningful life. Welcome, Dr. Jamie Huysman, to the Healing from Toxic Abuse podcast. It is an honor to have you here with me today. Dr. Huysman is a best-selling author, the founder of the Toxic Abuse Relationship Network, a charity organization dedicated to raising awareness and providing treatment for those affected by narcissistic abuse. With over 30 years of experience in the fields of narcissistic behavior, mental health, and toxic abusive relationships, Dr. Huysman's experience and expertise has helped countless individuals navigate the complexities of toxic relationships. Today, we'll explore how individuals can empower themselves to break free from the cycle of unhealthy relationships. Dr. Huysman, thank you for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you and learning about your knowledge and experience.
Thank you for having me, and also having this forum for everybody to educate, empower, and I say energize. This is, I think, the number one public health disaster in the world, and it won't be COVID that kills us or bubonic plague. It's going to be some malignant narcissist in Russia with his hand on the bomb. That's going to be our undoing. So the sooner we get educated and change this situation, the better. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I agree so much. And thank you. Can you just share your personal journey that led you to specialize in toxic abusive relationships?
I would. And I'm very vulnerable, I'm saying, as a psychologist, social worker, and trauma therapist. I mean, I've always been in therapy. I was a tough kid. I was an oppositional kid, and I got diagnosed with depression, as most of our family had it, and ADD and all that stuff. And to be honest with you, I started working, with my own therapist years ago, and I had ups and downs. Eventually, I said, this stuff pretty much is cool, seems to be working. Eventually, I said to myself, I'm going to become a clinical social worker, and I did. That was 33 years ago when only women were becoming it. There were 30 women in my class and 2 men. And so I learned about psychopathology. I've always been interested in the mind, and I've always thought that that's the frontier that we all need to go into, self-awareness. Figure ourselves out before we go to space or oceans. Because to know oneself, when I was depressed, I remember my mom giving me a book and said, Jamie, study it. And I go, why? I'm depressed. She goes, well, to know oneself is to know the world. So go figure. I started working in addiction treatment centers, running psych hospitals. I ended up in TV in 1992, talking about the exploitation of the mentally ill on TV, the talk, court, and reality shows. So I worked on 12 talk, court, and reality shows. And still at the same time, I was teaching psychopathology at the university and talking about toxic behavior from a cerebral place, from a book learning place. And then, gosh knows, one day, a couple of decades ago, I met somebody, her name is Joanne, and that was it. My gosh, had 2 feet on the ground, thought I knew what I was doing, was a decent therapist, could diagnose anybody, could teach. I knew nothing, Deb, when I found out. When my knees hit the ground from narcissistic abuse and being in a toxic relationship, I mean, I was lucky to ever survive it. I remember back then to this day, the scars that are still there. So what told me was that nobody really knows about the cluster B, the axis 2. We call the relationship disorders of borderline narcissistic personality disorder, histrionic or antisocial. And we meet people. And the American Psychological Association says that 1 out of 8 have an attachment disorder, and they impact the collateral damage is over 150 million people in the United States alone, with families and kids and work sites. So, wow, by hitting my knees to the ground and just not realizing this, and thought I knew something. And then I got into recovery for complex trauma. And that was years ago. And to be honest with you, that was really my saving grace. And today I'm very grateful for the experience, but it was an experience I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. So that's how I started concentrating now on toxic abusive relationships, and realized that we needed to bring something to the world to create awareness.
Yeah, I agree. And it's sometimes it is so subtle. A lot of times you don't even know that you're in one, and it's been normalized for so long. You started the foundation, the TAR Network, dedicated to supporting survivors of narcissistic abuse worldwide. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that.
Thank you. I always love this one. I am the executive director and founder, but I don't get paid from it. I work currently at my day job. I'm chief compassion officer at a medical group that's mostly owned by United Health, and so I oversee toxic work sites. But it was almost a calling that I ran the Lisa Gibbons Memory Foundation. Lisa and I, when I worked in television, and her show started a 501c3, and we went in 10 cities around the country and opened up caregiver sites at hospitals. Caregivers needed mind, body, and spirit sort of work. And we wrote a book called Take Your Oxygen First, dealing with burnout and compassion fatigue, because I've been a trauma therapist since about 1990, I guess, at FSU. And I knew how to run a charity, I knew how to create it. And it was for Lisa, and she took care of her mom with Alzheimer's, and it was for caregivers. But when I realized, this issue of toxic abusive relationship, narcissistic abuse, and I also realized my experience in television said I had to language it properly. Geraldo and Montel and Lisa used to scream, "Hey, cut the psychobabble, Jamie. You're talking to 6 million people." And they were right. So I said, well, nobody cares how to diagnose this. They just care they're in an emotionally abusive relationship with a covert, with an overt, with a malignant, who they just are taking on mortar fire. So we decided to call it TAR Network, because TAR is exactly what I felt like I was in. It's like you said, you don't know you're getting into it. You get love bombed, and slowly your hand gets onto the TAR, and you think you see and feel your soulmate. And then they're working on a transactional basis, and you're working with love. So you're seeing this game almost in two different rules. And then you get put on the pedestal, and you get valued, and you become the supply, and then you get devalued as soon as intimacy gets closer. And then all of a sudden you get under their tent, or you get in arguments, or you then go take them to their 4-year-old or 5-year-old where they're fixed at. They go to a shame spiral, and then it's just rage and hell. And so finally they start ghosting you, and you get discarded. They didn't care. They'll move on to their next one. They'll shoot up their supply. And you're sitting there going, what happened to me? What went on? So I called it TAR, because it was like getting your foot in something and never getting it out. And TAR is the dark triad of a person with no empathy, no accountability, and Machiavellian, transactional. And that happens at a young age during the attachment stage, where they don't have a primary caregiver worth a damn, who won't help them even understand that the world is safe. So I met somebody in Prague, actually. She wrote from her perspective, men's issues. And we started writing content together. And now we're writing a book called tartales.org, and which is the basis, and we'll get to it later, of our international support group, Taranon. And so the TAR Network was born, and we thought we could make it like the Library of Congress of attachment disorders, for men, for women, for high conflict caregiving, for work sites, and even teens and tweens. So I'm an older daddy with a 12-year-old, so she helps me with Olivia Rodrigo's Vampire or Taylor Swift's Anti-Hero, and we even go through lyrics, because trauma to me has to be accessible, has to be languaged properly. So I use rock and roll, I use film. And so the TAR Network was a dream that I knew I would not be able to get to the promised land. I would see it maybe, but never get to it. So I have a group of millennials, all around me, that hopefully once we have everything in place. So just so you know, and I'll give it right back to you, the TAR Network has 3 projects. One is the development of our TAR Center, which we call Oasis. It's here in Fort Lauderdale, and it's on Las Olas, and we're developing a complex post-traumatic stress disorder center of excellence, because there's nothing there. And I needed it desperately when I was there. The second thing is support. The support is Tar-Anon, where we're doing free support groups. We're seeing hundreds of people coming now to our support groups. They have nowhere to go, and just they could be in recovery for alcohol and drugs because they're disassociating with something, but they're coming to talk about what we just said: the love bombing, the hoovering, the what's going on in my life, the parental alienation. And then the third thing I wanted to do with the charity was develop a prevention educational programs that are neuroregulating. I mean, as a trauma therapist in the Polyvagal Institute, we want the antidote to be a neuroregulated parenting process, because you can't co-parent with one of these. You can't counter-parent because you don't want to put them down and create the alienation. It's the worst childhood abuse of all. So you have to neuroregulate and show them an alternative of health and safety. So that's it. 501c3 is about treatment, support, and prevention. And so we ask everybody to come here. Obviously, this is Mental Health Awareness Month. Whenever this airs, I'm not sure, but they're welcome to come on May 31st to our all-day summit for free, which is called From Scars to Stars Summit. But they could probably access it even after the podcast as well.
Perfect. Thank you. That's great. I love what you're doing. I love that. Can people join it via like video, or do they have to be in the area?
No, the good news is, this one we're doing totally virtually, and it's done through an organization that's really doing it right. We have 5 speakers. One of them, many of you will know, she was the wife of the Wolf of Wall Street, right? She's on Instagram, and we have an Instagram site with 70,000 people, and her name is Dr. Nadine. And after she was married to Jordan, if you knew the Wolf of Wall Street, and he went to jail and in treatment, she actually went and became a psychologist 20 years ago. So she just wrote a book called Run Like Hell. And so she's the key speaker. And then I have 4 others, one dealing with children who are going through attachment issues. I have a woman who's phenomenal from Authentic Insider, a magazine where she talks about a recovery from sexual abuse and her toxic relationships that she got involved with. And the person who heads up National Trauma Awareness Month, Heather. So we have 5 speakers that day, and it's virtual. And we will send you the link, and we've opened it up for free. Everything we're trying to do is subsidized by donors. So yes, I would welcome anybody and everybody, especially those who are listening to your podcast as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'll go there too. I want to hear it. That'd be very interesting.
We'll have you speaking at the next one. We're going to do it every year during Mental Health Awareness Month.
That's awesome. And then just getting back to what you had said earlier about it feeling like tar and feeling like you're stuck. And when you start getting into these relationships, so many people start getting into these relationships and don't realize it. And they don't. And a lot of clients come to me, and a lot of people will say that they're not in a toxic relationship because they're not able to identify it or even define one. Usually it's like it has to be physical abuse or something like that, or very overt, at least verbal abuse. And sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes it's very subtle. How do you define a toxic relationship, and what are some of the key signs that someone might be in one?
Well, that the dark triad, which I call the tar, that sticky stuff. And if you go to our Instagram, you'll see these animations. You'll see the ones stuck in tar. You'll see the energy vampires too. We try to teach healthy relationships and toxic relationships. Look, I'm just going to say to your listeners right now, the first part, if it's too good to be true and you think it is, it probably is. And so the first thing about knowing you're in a relationship, because you're 100% right, you're not going to find the malignant narcissist, the overt, the person that's so easy to spot. You're going to find the covert, or the person who literally is under the radar. They're low self-esteem. There's nothing there inside. As a therapist, I will tell you that they suffer from deep low self-esteem and were raised in a terrible relationship. But what they do is they create this incredible image. I mean, I have doctors, we have presidents, we have autocrats, who run in countries who are covert narcissists. They're just phenomenal in their image. So I think the first thing if you meet somebody and they say that you're your soulmate the next month and 30 days or 90 days, they're not. I mean, they are going to give you the saddest, most victim-driven story. And it's probably true. And I don't take anything away. And I have deep compassion for the terrible way that they were raised. They created this attachment disorder. But I always tell my patients, A, it's not your fault, because probably you've been gaslit to death and the projections are everywhere. And you kind of think that it's your fault. But that is the key of a narcissist, is that they'll always make it your fault. And second, you didn't raise this person. So God love it. If it hit me, which it did, and put me on my knees, and I've got 33 years of training, educational clinical training to work with patients, and I couldn't change the person in front of me. I always say to my clients or anybody who listen, how can you change them? So you'll hear a victim-driven story. Don't jump into what we call the tar pit. They want you to come into the tar pit. If it's too good to be true and they become your soulmate and the love bombing is quick and fast, get away. If you start hearing love hurting you in terms of words, insults, little biting cuts, you don't look good enough, you're too this, you're too that, you're bullying, guess what? That's a red flag. Okay, it's not about you. Now, the issue is, and I'll say this and turn it back over to you, it was about me. When I got into recovery for complex PTSD, I realized that these were behaviors during the psychological war that I had to go through as a child that fit me like a glove, right? So I was dealing with love and God, beautiful picket fence and family. And I would calm people down. I was a peacekeeper. I was a hero child, right? And so it fit me like a glove. I thought I could change this person. I thought I could do this. So I had to get in touch with my stuff because there was zero way I was going to ever change her. Mm-hmm. So all these symptoms come together, and you have to understand, you don't deserve hell. Love is when two people come together, have each other's back, are compassionate, support each other, 50-50. I always say at work, when somebody works harder than the other, that's what burnout is. And if you're not in that relationship and it's kind of that bullying starts to happen, chances are, whether they have 5 indicators or they're just a damn bully, you probably should get out and go find a place to find yourself first, is what I tell my patients. Take about a year or two break, because your picker is probably challenged here.
Right. Yeah. Picker's broken. And they play on empathy. They play on your ability to care for them. So when they start in with those sob stories, or they start in with their victimhood, I think our first instincts are to want to go in there and fix them and help them. And then there's all this programming that's underlying that we're a bad person if we don't. So I kind of want to touch on that a little bit. How do attachment disorders contribute to toxic relationships, and what role do they play in healing?
They're huge, and this is the issue at hand. So the American Psychological Association, I think, really underestimates the number. And they say it's about 1 out of 8 people have an attachment disorder. So for your audience, and you know this well, let's look at the spectrum. It's called attachment theory. And it's a phenomenally great theory. It really started with Bowlby, who was the theorist, but Dr. Marsha Linehan, who created dialectical behavioral therapy, created something that she said was for attachment disorders, because she was self-proclaimed in her way as a borderline, whatever that was in her mind. Attachment disorder happens literally between the ages of 4 and 8 years old. A child is expecting to have an unconditional, loving, safe relationship with their primary caregiver. The world becomes safer. When I cry, somebody holds me. Somebody's fair, consistent, available. The world is okay because my caregiver is okay. The attachment disorder occurs when both parents can't do that. Why do I say both parents? Because I work with broken marriages a lot and parental alienation. And if you just have one half healthy neurotic parent, like me, I call myself a half healthy neurotic parent, chances are you will not create it. Chances are you'll be able to neuroregulate. You'll be able to connect with your child. They'll feel the alternative of what it's like in a neuro-safe environment as opposed to walking on eggshells, and they won't be. But when both parents don't. Like, I know one patient of mine whose mother was sick in the hospital all the time, father was a blooming narcissist, realized that if you have a mom or dad that is one, without intervention, chances are you're either going to be a cluster B or a doormat at the end of this whole thing. And that's why it's so critical for parents to I say, stay connected to the psyche of your child. So the attachment disorder begins between the 4 and 8. the child comes out of that stage that has no primary caregiver, no safety, in that kill or be killed mentality. The world is against me. I've got to figure this out. Nothing is safe here. And so they grow up to this image, and it's phenomenal, of creating this sort of amazing sort of cover. And when that mask drops later, and we're talking about the mask dropping when we with a partner, there's nothing there, but they're phenomenal in navigating this terribly unsafe world. So when you're fighting with someone, and I remember this, I'm fighting with a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, because they're fixed at that narcissistic stage of development. We all go through it, right? We all go through it, but we develop what's called object constancy. We realize our mom's going to be there, or dad's going to be there, but these guys don't realize anybody's going to be there. So it's the attachment disorder. Now, I will say this to everybody. Why Dr. Marshall Linehan and DBT work so well, because we all have attachment issues. I mean, I'm go see my therapist every week, and I'm sure she's dealing with my avoidant attachment style, or somebody's anxious attachment style, or secure, and that's very few, leave it to beaver people, but secure attachment style. So attachment is on a full continuum. But if you have 5 indicators, 5 of the 9, you'll get diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, borderline, histrionic, or antisocial. We call them the relationship disorders, the cluster Bs. So, and a disorder is different than a style. And there's a great book out there. I just want to say, for all you guys who are dating and you kind of concerned about it, first, like I said, date yourself, marry yourself, parent yourself. The whole key to this is reparenting yourself, because you didn't get it as a child. But there's a good book out there called Attached. And so if you're going to go out and date, read it, because you'll read about everybody's attachment style. Now, if it's a disorder, take it, like Dr. Nadine says, run like hell.
That's good. That's a really good description of that. There's another thing that just occurred to me as you were talking. A lot of people don't distinguish between the whether it's the cluster B or along that spectrum of the personality disorders or the traits, because people will pick up some of the traits after a while, but not necessarily be stunted emotionally like what we see in in cluster B.
Yes, you're so right. I'm so glad you brought that up. So when I get, and I'm sure you too, when I get a client or a couple, and they're both in an insane relationship. Let's say Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, because they put their life out there, right? They said, "Hey, look at me. I have enough money." Johnny had enough money to, this time around, try to tell Lily, Rose, and Jack, his kids, I wasn't it. So nobody has that kind of money to actually do that. But he did a service in some way, because really, we all do have traits. Deb, you're 100% right. We can be very self-engrossed at times. Depression, for me, made me self-engrossed. My world got smaller. The difference is, again, when I get 2 people in there, let's say like Johnny and Amber, and again, I'm not diagnosing either one, but if I get 2, there's a concept, which I know it's a French concept we call folie à deux, which is a madness of 2. I can't tell the narcissist from the empath or codependent for the first 4 or 5 sessions. I literally can't. They both mirror each other so much. But the one that starts rising is the one that has self-awareness. The one that starts rising says, I kind of get it. I get the accountability. The one that starts rising to the point of redemption and turning your life around has empathy and is not transactional, but is really kind of real and takes ownership. So we can have traits, and we do all have traits. But then there's those who have more than traits, are really the point of no return, that are mentally challenged, and we call them personality disorders, and they can't change. Now, but I couldn't diagnose somebody until 5, 6, 7 times, possibly, as I watched the dynamics between 2. So, and you're the same way as a therapist. I mean, it takes us a while to peel the onion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. I think that self-reflection part is key to the ability to get in there, make some changes, and see, and accountability, I think, is what you said. Can you talk about the impact of toxic abuse, the toxic abusive relationships on individuals, couples, family? What impact does that have?
Huge. And the collateral damage to this is like no other disorder. This isn't like depression or bipolar I ran treatment centers for it. Now, let's face it, addicts do create, it's a family illness. For addicts and alcoholics, which my treatment centers, basically clinically served, that is something where everybody get in their ecosphere gets hit or killed or runs away. Believe me. But with toxic abusive relationships or literally the clinical disorder, the collateral damage is insane. You get your brain cognitively changed if you really understand trauma, which I know you do. I mean, there's trauma that we as therapists can't even get to, that 0 to 4 years old, where we have no record of it. And it's our brainstem, it's our amygdala. Then there's 4 to 8, we start developing common sense, executive reasoning and prefrontal cortex work. But in utero, we don't even know the traumas that exist there either. So what we come together with is this concept called complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or I call it almost childhood. And it's kind of death by 1,000 cuts, right? So it's childhood. And my parents, God love them, I'm sure they think they did their best, but they had Dr. Spock. I'd lock him up as an emotional child abuser if I read it. And they did all those things with me. So to your point, this is a group that consciously, unfortunately, has to get to A to B, and they'll do whatever they have to get there. So the collateral damage is twice as bad. Well, why? Well, an addict screws people over, and then we get in the steps, and we do a 9th step, and we say, we make amends for it. They weaponize people. They got to win. They don't. It's not win. It's not anything in the middle gray. They are binary. And then when I ran treatment centers, I would have my staff be fighting each other, and I'd walk in and I'd say, oh, okay, where's the cluster B? Because they would split the staff. And so it's good mom, bad mom. And if you leave a relationship, they're going to weaponize the children. And that's why at TAR Network, probably the fastest growing subset we got is parental alienation, which is the most tragic abuse of all. You're a therapist. I'm not taking away if somebody's emotional, physical, or sexual abuse. That's deep. And it's to them everything. But as a therapist, when I have to work with a child who half of them has been told is the worst person in the world, has been weaponized to hate the other person, don't ever forget that child has to look in the mirror. And when they look in the mirror, they have to look at half mom and half dad. So when they look in the mirror, they're going to hate half themselves. So I have to deal. My best buddy is a neurologist. He lost 3. He's a great daddy, but he lost 3 kids. They won't even talk to him because they were weaponized. So this is a more conscious effort than the addict in terms of throwing a bomb and seeing things blow up. The addict will keep shooting up or keep drinking, and they'll have hell all around them. This one is much more calculated, and they will weaponize hurt, and whether it's a child or somebody else. And by the way, if you're in a relationship, here's another one of your red flags from earlier, and somebody's isolating you from your friends, from your family. We call it the energy vampire, and sucking you dry and is jealous beyond belief for reasons that you don't even have a clue because you're in love and you say, I'm not doing anything. That too is a huge red flag because they are literally coming from that 4-year-old spot of deep need, and they'll suck your energy out. And if you're feeling that terrible jealousy, there's another time that you could probably look for the exit door.
Yeah. Yeah, they do. And they can do it in really subtle ways to make you think that you're the one isolating yourself by these subtle punishments. But I love that you brought up the weaponizing the kids against the other, because I see that happen all the time. What advice do you have for parents that are navigating co-parenting with a toxic ex-partner, with from after a toxic relationship?
Well, I'm sure I'm going to be controversial with this one because actually I treat it, and I have been through it, and because she had a daughter too. And I can tell you it's possibly the worst experience in the entire world because the child is an innocent, and the child just wants to love both mom and dad. And the child is blank slate, that. And the child doesn't want to hear just love. They want somebody to be fair, consistent, and available. But what the toxic individual will do is not just weaponize that child, and forever that'll be a clinical path of hell and damnation. But you know what they also do, Deb, which you know all too well, is they weaponize people. We call them flying monkeys. So I remember when I first got out of that relationship, I realized I had to get rid of all people that we knew collectively together. It was sad, it hurt me. But I had to tell everybody I needed to create strong boundaries because every one of them was being weaponized by telling, gaslighting things that had nothing to do with me, but got caught in terms of the vice of the toxic person wanting to win and having no way to get to me. Because, you and I also work with clients, and sometimes it's no contact, sometimes modified contact. But here's where the controversial piece comes in. And so forgive me, I'm going to really say it out loud since I experientially lived it. I don't believe you can co-parent with a toxic individual. I just don't believe it's possible. I think they will forever use that to reel you into what we call the tar pit. And whatever issue you come up with, and I remember I never went back to this person to ask to share expenses, and they always said why, because they always want to get back at me. And I said because my mental health was too important. I would rather bartend, I would rather deliver pizzas than ever ask for anything. So you can't co-parent, you can't counter-parent because again, alienation is the worst. You don't want to say anything negative. So what we're doing at the TAR network, and we're doing it with experts, subject matter experts, we're developing neuroparenting, and we're going to OB units now. We have 5 hospitals designated here in South Florida, and hopefully we're going to fan out because people are learning how to breathe, how to do Pilates, how to do yoga, Lamaze method, but nobody's telling anybody how not to create the next Frankenstein. And no child wants to be evil, but a parent doesn't realize how huge of a factor. So I don't believe you can co-parent. I don't believe you can counter-parent, but I do believe you create the strong boundaries. You do have the modified contact. You have to go back and forth with the child. I would not use the court systems. I will tell you, I'm a subject matter expert and get called into these court cases. And by time the court case is called the second or third time around, your partner's already tortured the child and has taken everything out on them. So you have to get in front of this. We call it the TAR dojo. And that's what I do with my clients. Realize that every toxic person is going to want to step over the line, sweet Jesus. Somewhere it's going to happen. I'll just take Putin. So his is Ukraine, or I'll take anybody and just one step over the line. They're going to do it. There's so much hubris and ego. So you can't be a puncher. You got to be a counter puncher. And don't ever jump in the mud and fight with a narcissist because it's like jumping in the mud and fighting with a pig. The pig likes it and you're going to get dirty. They're skilled at it. So you have to be twice as skilled. And that's why you have no contact or become a gray rock and have modified contact. You can't co-parent, can't counter-parent. So you neuroparent. But never give up on that child's psyche because that child eventually, like all of us do, will gravitate to safety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good advice. I remember being told that they were 6 steps ahead of me, which is very true, and being very scared about that because they play that game. They've mastered it. You're not going to be able to compete with that. You're not going to come up with the tactics that they do. It's so ingrained in them. There's no way to co-parent. There's no way to counter-parent. So I agree. Gray rock, do what you can. Trust that eventually the truth will reveal itself, and it always does. But
and make sure you have a family of choice. So these are people I call who meet you halfway. They could be from your church, synagogue, ashram. They could be people that you've met from work that don't bully you. They're not toxic. They listen to you. They bear witness. Make sure you always keep these people. They're like sponsors. When we have TAR on, I have TAR mentors instead of tormentors. These are people with 3 years of recovery. But you always need to have people reflect back to you. Guess what? What I say every Monday night to my support group, it's not your fault. This isn't your fault. Whatever you believe now, because they all come thinking, I should have done this. I could have done this. I could. You couldn't do it. I couldn't do it with 33 years of training. You can't do it. What you need to do is go love yourself because healing is your greatest revenge.
Exactly. Yes. What are some things that you tell people to bring them back, rebuild their self-esteem, their sense of self after leaving a toxic relationship?
Well, I certainly will suggest to everybody to go to our partners, and I know you know them well too, the cptsdfoundation.org. Go to cptsdfoundation.org. I kind of believe they have got a holy grail on very affordable interventions for complex PTSD, because that is the only antidote I know. I really was in recovery for codependency for 27 years. And I believe me, going to CODA meetings were great because, and Bill got it right with Bill and Bob got it right with AA and NA, which is the steps, and emotional regulation, which is a trauma sort of resolution, and co-regulation. Because like Gabor Mate says, we get screwed up in a relationship called childhood, but we also heal through healthy relationships. So my thing is understand complex PTSD. Go get Pete Walker's book, How to Thrive, Not Just Survive with Complex PTSD. What I also suggest is come to our TARNON meetings. If you go to tarnon.org, Toxic Abuse Relationship Anonymous, TARanon.org, you will find for free, you will find on Monday nights, just go to our website, TAR Network, you will find people who have gone through this who actually can meet you halfway. The beauty of support groups, the beauty of co-regulation, of having people say it's not your fault, and being there when you get sucked into the vortex of the other person. So we've got to become our own therapists. And I'm not saying don't go see a therapist, because I only go see trauma trained therapists, only go see somebody that understands dialectical behavioral therapy, because I hate to say it, psychotherapists without training can gaslight you too. This is about retraining our brain, right, Deb? This is about neuroplasticity. This is about interventions like EMDR, breath work, which I do. Go to Tarnon, which is an emotional regulator and a co-regulator. It's free. When you go to our website, we have it at 6 o'clock every Monday night. And we're growing, we're going to have it in person eventually and have it like steps and promises, just like AA. But we're inviting everybody for free there. And of course, I'd love to always co-facilitate any group with you and your clients. So you have to seek out your therapy and understand, no longer be the victim. That's why we say it from scars to stars. STARS, the acronym is what? Survivors of Toxic Abusive Relationships. That's a STAR. So I think I have to tell you, and I'll end with this about clinical. It's not sitting on a mountain in Tibet and having a spiritual awakening. Complex trauma is 3 steps forward, 2 backwards. You have to lean in, like Nike, the goddess of victory, said, and the company says, you got to do it. It is breath work. It is Pilates. It is yoga. It's retraining the brain. It is meditation. It is healthy relationships. So you have to write your own treatment plan and make sure you're incorporating this, and have grace and forgiveness for yourself as 3 forward, 2 backwards. Don't jump back into the tar pits. They're going to constantly hoover you and try to get you back a supply. Realize if they're with somebody else, they're going to recreate this. They have absolutely zero insight. They can't connect motivation and behavior. So much you think that they're in the relationship of their life and left you behind. It's same poop, different day with them. So go take care of yourself. So I'd start with Tarnon. I'd start with complexptsdfoundation.org. I would definitely listen to your podcast, because all this is awareness, transformation, and self-love. And you're bringing awareness all the time here.
Oh, thank you. And I love that you set up this support group. I love it. I have not heard of it, but I'm going to blast it everywhere and tell all of my clients. We talk about this all the time, how it is like an addiction. We kind of compare it to heroin. Maybe it works on the same neural pathways. I'm not sure, but there's oxytocin involved. So once you become addicted to this, and that's what they do, they foster that addiction. They foster that sense of dependency. So again, it isn't your fault. You're right. It's not your fault, but it needs to be normalized, and there needs to be a support group, and you have one. I'm just thrilled that you set that up.
I'm thrilled you're going to be a part of it, and we'll get you all the information for all your people. But you're 100% right. And I want to tell everybody, if you don't think it's an addiction, you're insane, because here's the gig. It's the trauma bond addiction. Okay, the trauma bond that nobody quite understands, the Stockholm syndrome. But I'll say it really quick. If you're a chicken, God love you, and get fed, eventually you get tired of food. Okay, you don't need the food. If you're a chicken and you get shocked negatively, and you constantly get shocked like a child who gets spanked, eventually you don't care about the shock. You don't care about the spanking. It doesn't matter. Now, if you get the food one day and you get the shock the next day, That's called intermittent reinforcement. That creates this hostage theory kind of thing, this trauma bond. You don't know if your hostage taker is going to feed you or beat you. And this is precisely what happens in a toxic relationship. So to your point, if the definition of an addiction is to do any behavior despite adverse consequences, I would focus on the trauma bond as being the addiction and showing how unmanageable our lives are, and realize that in and of itself is going to take you down a rabbit hole.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And do the steps of the Tardon, do they kind of follow? I know you said there was some neuroregulation, which maybe explain that a little bit, but do they also follow like the standard steps of other support groups like AA or Al-Anon or things like that?
Well, I love AA and Al-Anon. I love CODA. I was going to it for years, but I will say to your point, I didn't want to do junk science, so I know I need to connect spirituality with science. So we got a fabulous researcher. Her name is Dr. Sandra Brown. Many of you know her probably, and she worked with Purdue University and worked with narcissistic abuse survivors and created things. And so we used her research, but we also used the Polyvagal Institute, which I'm very privileged to be on the board of. I'm also on the advisory board of Complex PTSD. So we took what we could scientifically, but we put it into a spiritual piece. So AA and NA did lead the way, and emotional regulation is the steps, and co-regulation are the meetings. So if you look at our steps, it is totally neuroregulation. It is trauma reduction. It is dealing with now, not complex PTSD for you, and you can explain to your listeners as well. This is not PTSD where, God forbid, you lose a leg in war, or you get shot, or something. Your whole life shifts because of a car accident. This is, again, complex childhood. It's not in the DSM-5 yet, but it has a whole different remedy. Those who have PTSD, if they had strong childhoods, were fair, consistent, available, and had resilience, will come out of the PTSD in a stronger way. Mine wasn't so great. That's how I was susceptible to the relationship. Those who didn't have resilience as a child, had to be in that kind of war zone, won't come out as well of a PTSD experience. So the PTSD is in the DSM. We got it in there, I think, in 3. DSM does not have yet complex PTSD, but eventually it will. I mean, if anybody wants to know scientifically about it, go to cdc.gov, and look up the Kaiser Permanente ACE studies, the Adverse Childhood Experience studies. They've been going on for 20 years. This in itself will show you how adverse childhood experiences, complex trauma, affects your medical health, the longevity of your life, whether you end up in a prison or rehab. It's childhood trauma. So I think that's our goal. And I tell everybody, stay in your programs of recovery, but start looking at your complex trauma. That's the key.
Right. Yeah, and that definitely does need to be in the DSM, 100%. We are out of time, and I might ask you don't have to answer now, but I might ask you to come back because there's a lot more that I wanted to ask you and talk about. And this has been so interesting. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your invaluable insights in healing from toxic abuse. And I hope this conversation has shed some light on the importance of self-care and boundary setting and seeking support in navigating these complexities of toxic relationships and CPTSD. And please see the links. I'm going to put them all in the show notes so that you can connect with Dr. Jamie Huysman and learn more about the TAR network. I'm going to be checking into that. I'll be logging on May 31st. Hopefully I'll get this edited in time. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
I'll add this. You're so good at what you do, and it's such a great interview that I just had. Don't worry. We can do many, many podcasts together, because I think this is a great way to educate, empower, energize, or make people aware and transform. And with your voice and getting Tarnon out there, I'd love you to become part of our 501c3. We couldn't get enough of programs like yours that are sensitive, empathic. You're vulnerable with your story. And so, you'll have a hard time getting rid of us, because we'll have a long-term relationship. Yeah, we're looking forward to it. I'll bring my co-founder in Prague. She'll never leave you alone when she hears your style and your podcast. So thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Inner Source Healing Podcast, Healing from Toxic Abuse. It's important to give yourself the self-compassion that you deserve and remember that your feelings matter. If you want more information or you want to contact me, please visit my website at innersourcetherapy.com. That's INNERSOURCETHERAPY.com.